White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby was confronted by a reporter during a press briefing about Biden's recent gaffes. Not all of his gaffes, just the most recent ones. Let's watch.
The president has lied about being at ground zero the day after the September 11th attacks, falsely claimed he saw the Pittsburgh bridge collapse, claimed his grandfather died in the hospital days before his birth. What is going on with the president? Is he just believing things that didn't happen did happen, or is he just randomly making stuff up?
The president was deeply touched and honored to be able to spend 9/11 with military members there in Alaska and some families, and was honored by their presence and the chance to make an important set of remarks about why we need to continue to remember that day. And he did that. And he spoke about a visit to Ground Zero, which he did participate in about a week or so after the event, and what that looked and what that smelled and what that felt like. And it had a visceral impact on him, as it did so many other Americans on that terrible day. And he's focused on making sure that an attack like that never happens again, which is why we've improved our over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability and why we continue to hold terrorist networks accountable. And it's why he spent so much time last week shoring up our national security interests in a vital part of the world on issues that aren't necessarily tied to terrorism, but very much tied to our ability to secure peace and prosperity there and around the world.
He's had a string of saying things that happened, things that are easily debunked. Why does he keep doing that?
The president was grateful to spend that time with those family members and those troops.
Why does Joe Biden keep doing that? Indeed, that's a question we all have. Let's take a look back at the president's actual 9/11 remarks from earlier this week.
Ground Zero in New York. And I remember standing there the next day and looking at the building. I felt like I was looking through the gates of hell. It looked so devastating because from where you could stand.
That was something that Joe Biden said that also definitely did not happen, much like that reel of all the other things he said that also did not happen. And I'm confused why the White House seems to be so dead set on continuing to make these things worse by not just admitting that it turns out he's actually fallible because he's 80 years old and he might not always remember what he was doing 2 decades ago. But why does he insist on constantly using these anecdotes, tall tales, fibs, lies, if you will, depending on the case, to try to connect with people when theoretically there's plenty of things he could say that would not get him, the White House, and everyone else in hot water and lead to such cringeworthy explanations or attempted explanations from people like John Kirby?
Yeah, President Biden talks to the American public. I've said this before, like parents tell their children bedtime stories. It doesn't matter if it's true. It just matters if it's interesting. He'll follow the train of thought wherever it goes. And I think it would sound nice to be at ground zero. And that's as far as his brain goes. He's like, I'm going to say I was at ground zero. That's really how I think his brain is functioning these days. It's scary. It's scary that this is the person in the highest public office. John Kirby's face says everything when he's asked this question, when they're like, well, President Biden said he was at ground zero on 9/11. And he just goes, well, he says so many things. The facial expression just communicates so much there. And so that's the task that you're up to if you're in this administration. You have to answer for President Biden's gaffes. To say that he saw the Pittsburgh bridge fall, to say that he was at 9/11 on ground zero, he says so many things that are just stories he makes up in his head that he thinks a good president would say or do. And maybe it's a consequence of not growing up in the age of the internet where everyone watching you tell the story, whether it's in a meeting or on cable news, we can look it up now. We can see if what you're saying is actually true. We can live fact check. And so it matters more that what you're saying is accurate.
Well, and I think beyond just making a mess for the White House and John Kirby, and you're right, he's always one of the spokespeople for the White House, so you can just see it in his face, how he's like, why are we doing this again and again and again? But I think, beyond just making this mess, it also often comes across just very poorly. This is the president, one of their duties as the leader of the American people, supposedly, is to show Americans that he cares and that the federal government does care about what happens to its people and show, raising the visibility of disasters and things like that. But so often he trots out these these very untrue stories when he's supposed to be comforting people, and it just comes off horribly. When he's talking to people who survived the fires in Maui, and he's talking about supposedly his house almost burned to the ground and his wife and cat almost died. But we have newspaper reporting from when it happened that shows it was contained to one room. It was basically this electrical fire, and his Corvette, his precious Corvette, and his cat and his wife were obviously not in real danger. So how does he not have that switch in his head that's like, don't say this does not apply here?
Yeah, we had George Bush giving us you fool me once, you fool me, you can't get fooled again. But with Biden, it's like, does he have advanced Alzheimer's? It's like, is he remembering his own life incorrectly? In which case, what else is he forgetting? Now, having a short-term memory, useful, good for the presidency. Having a long-term memory, I would find, is also useful. So we don't repeat the mistakes of history, whether you are alive for them or not. It just seems to me that memory is something important for the president to have. So you can have Kirby reassure the public, don't worry, Biden is focused on the here and now and preventing another terrorist attack from devastating the country. I'm not convinced by that, to be focused on the here and now. It's not that reassuring that he's cognizant and is aware of what's going on all of the time. So I don't think that talking point really reassures people. And to see John Kirby get a little bit angry, to me, it seems to me, he's speaking to the foreign policy and security establishment. He's like, we have things covered. It doesn't matter to him, I don't think, if Biden is okay, if he's at his peak mental health. I don't think it matters to him, because I think he's one of those state career guys that believes the security of the country should be in the hands of people who are career military personnel, career security and intelligence personnel, and that they, in fact, know better than someone elected by the American people who served time in Congress. I really believe that he doesn't think it even matters if Joe Biden is cognizant, and he wants to talk about what he's doing in his role in the National Security Council. And that's a position that I don't particularly respect, because I think that anyone serving in public office should have the backing of the American people and should have to run for election. I think it's a lot of power for individuals to have that are not directly accountable to the public. And so to me, that kind of condescension, speaking down to the press, where he's like, don't worry, we have everything under control, and Biden briefs us and meets with the Security Council as needed, it's just like rubbing me completely the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying, it's not, in this case, it's Joe Biden claiming that he was in a place that didn't actually happen. But he has actually said things that got him in trouble with that national security establishment. When he was speaking, I believe it was in Poland, and he ad-libbed the end of a speech about how, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, basically and seemingly advocating that the U.S. position was for regime change in Russia. And then you had him a few times, I think it's at least 3 now, saying that the U.S. policy toward China, if there's a conflict between China and Taiwan, was to send American forces in to defend Taiwan. And you saw the people like John Kirby and everybody who works for him just scrambling to quickly tell reporters, oh, no, that's not the official policy. That's not what he meant, even though it's very clearly what he said. And it just adds to this picture of how, like, who's actually in charge here? Is it the people, or is it the individual, Joe Biden, that the people elected? Or is it this sort of permanent group of individuals who have just been there forever, don't have real accountability? Joe Biden's probably not going to hold them accountable because he doesn't know where he was or where he is. And it just feeds into this larger problem of, should the American people actually trust these institutions?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about former regime change type wars and involvements of the United States, we're all reminded of the Iran-Contra scandal time and again, because it was this moment where Ronald Reagan said to the country, the American people, that, yeah, members of Congress were involved in this scheme. Our CIA was involved in this scheme to sell weapons to the Contras in Nicaragua after the American people demanded that we didn't, and Congress voted unanimously promising the United States would not fund militarily regime change wars in Nicaragua. And then we funneled the money through Iran. And Ronald Reagan says, yes, people I'm very close with in Congress were doing this, Elliot Abrams and the like. The national security establishment was involved, the CIA, the NSA. But I had no idea it was going on. I think that means what Bud McFarland then said on the floor of Congress, that people are really starting to believe that the way we run foreign policy in this country isn't so good, but they have no idea just how bad it is. That couldn't be more true. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but I think it speaks to what Biden might know about what our official plan is when it comes to Russia and Ukraine as a problem. We're not supposed to tell the American people we're fighting for regime change there. That stays between us. We do that secretly. The American people find out in 20 years when it's released in the National Security Archives and it's declassified with a significant amount of information redacted. That's how we do things. But Biden, maybe, is doing something good for democracy by forgetting what he can say publicly and not, because now at least we have some government transparency.
That is an interesting way to find the silver lining of the cloud that is Joe Biden and his many mumbling speeches and things that he's not supposed to say or does say and chooses not to say. I often wonder exactly what, again, people are willing to tell him and how much talking about the TV show Veep is a phenomenon that happens in that many times where they decide we cannot tell the vice president or the president about this because they'll mention it and then it becomes a whole scandal. We've just got to keep it to ourselves among the unelected, unaccountable people, which I think is definitely a problem. And like you said, if we ever do find out about it, it comes years later with heavy redactions that make it basically impossible to figure out what actually happened. And also it's too late at that point often to hold anyone meaningfully accountable for it. And with that, we will be back with more Rising after this.